Hello, Robs. Hell yeah. Alright, time to read this bullshit. Cheers. Alright, Beer Money by Francis Stroh. A memoir of privilege and loss. Don't know what chapter this is and don't really care. There's the show an index of chapters? No. Let's get on with this bullshit. Soul Extinguisher. 1992 by Francis Stroh, one of her ingenious art projects. On a hot, windless day that everyone called earthquake weather, I sat in an editing room at the San Francisco Art Institute and pieced together my family's answers to my interview questions, trying to imagine the psychological effect on the viewer when all 6 narratives overlapped. I knew the visual effect of 6 talking mouths in one room would be captivating. In the tapes, Whitney's and Charlie's veneers cracked quickly, their upper lips beating with sweat, voices leaking bitterness. Bobby and I were subdued, philosophical, bent on humor. My parents were distant and instructive, looking down on their children from lofty heights, particularly when talking about Charlie. The problem with Charlie is he never grew up, my father paused and puffed on his pipe. We wish it were different, but it isn't. If you asked him today, he'd deny that he has any problems with drinking and drugs. He'd say, "Oh no, I don't have a problem." My father went on to share an exercise he himself had learned in rehab. You make a list of things you like about yourself in one column, and in another column, you list the things you don't like. Then you study the list and figure out what you can change about the things you don't like. Some things you can't change, but most things you can. He drew on his pipe with a certain satisfaction, talked about how he took the cure, then went on to admit that he still drank while on planes. What? I thought Dad was a non-drinker at this point. Dad's drinking was the catalyst that led to the divorce, said Bobby. And Charlie's problems may have surfaced during a fragile time in their marriage, which only caused Dad to drink more. There's a myth in my family that Charlie's alcoholism and drug addiction caused the breakup of my parents' marriage, I said. Charlie is a junkie, an alcoholic, said Whitney. He's stolen from his family. He's lied. He's cheated. He's shat all over them. It's broken their hearts. Dad blames me for the divorce, said Charlie, but that's a bunch of bullshit. It was his drinking. Each of my children has been deeply affected by Charlie's problems, said my mother. But in different ways. My ex-husband's been the most affected, to the point where he can hardly talk about it. She went on to say that my father had been ineffective at his job at the brewery and that her sons were procrastinators. But I see myself in my daughter. She is striving to achieve as I am in my own life. I think if I had those years of motherhood to do over again, it would turn out just the same. I'd like to have control over my children's poor decisions, but I find I don't. As I sat in the darkened editing room, something unexpected happened, something for which I was not prepared. I had my first conscious glimpse of just how profoundly screwed up we were, how detached, inhuman even. Each of us discussed Charlie as if he were nothing more than a character in a novel we'd recently read. We had learned well the art of detachment, my siblings and I, from our parents and perhaps theirs before them. I had been skating along the surface of the pain for years, pretending to look deeper, outwardly dismissing my parents' version of reality, even rebelling against it, all the while inwardly accepting it as fact. Our family was like one of those hand painted road signs that point in a multitude of directions at once. Laziness and bad genes were the problem, according to my mother. According to my father and Whitney, Charlie himself was the problem. Charlie would have it that our father alone was the problem, while according to Bobby and me, an unfortunate alchemy of both Charlie's and our father's problems was to blame. The cognitive dissonance between my parents' versions of the story and ours simply could not be reconciled. I had written a paper to be presented on a panel at the gallery discussing my piece in purely conceptual terms. Yet now I was unearthing a truth that could not be bound by any intellectual discussion. Looking at the piece as an outsider, I liked the tension of the raw emotional material pressing up against the cool, minimalist look I'd chosen. Those six rectangular screens displaying enormous talking mouths, but these had nothing to do with me, with what went on inside of me when I myself watched the tapes. The horror, the shock of recognition, the emotional foundation I had imagined was there, I realized had been cobbled together out of repression and denial. Time was passing, things were falling apart, and we seemed unable to catch ourselves. Switching off the lights in the editing suite, I pulled the door shut. When I came outside into the warm dusk, the sculpture students were piling debris into the parking lot dumpsters. I don't know why dumpsters is capitalized, but clouds of white dust rose up into the air every time they hurled something in. And I had the sudden impression that art was nothing more than a gratuitous accumulation of clutter that would someday have to be thrown away. Yeah, that's 99% of art. The sight of discarded ceramic heads, welded metal shapes, and cracked wooden pedestals heaped into the trash was demoralizing, and I briefly wondered if my work too would amount to this sort of nothing. The image of my father's stacks of photographs flickering through my mind. I walked down the hill on Chestnut to Columbus and up towards City Lights bookstore. The street hummed with life, people sitting at outdoor tables, crowded Italian cafes. I crossed the street to Cafe Roma, taking the last table outside. I gazed across the street at the Art Nouveau stained glass sign of Vesuvio Cafe, where the Beats had congregated back in the 50s. Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Gary Snyder. What the fuck's this have to do with your story? Suddenly I found myself recalling an evening I'd spent with Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs during my senior year at Duke. It was one of the most memorable of my life that evening, though I rarely told anyone about it, lest I be expected to share some revelation of cosmic proportions, when in truth the conversation and the poetry reading that followed had been disappointing, certainly as compared with the magnitude of their celebrity. Like so many college students in the 80s, I'd been fixated on the counterculture of the 50s and 60s. From Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground to Bob Dylan and the Beats. A religion major with a focus on Buddhism, I was headed to San Francisco as soon as I graduated, with high hopes of establishing myself as an artist there. I'd read all the beat writers and identified with their anti-establishment ethos as a psychology minor. I'd been influenced by the writings of Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, and Alan Watts. which had led to my research paper on the clinical use of LSD in the treatment of alcoholism. The local Hare Krishna chapter had been the subject of my photo essay for a documentary photography course. I'd even considered having the Hare Krishnas cook one of their famous vegetarian dinners to honor Ginsberg and Burroughs. Instead, I organized the dinner at a local vegetarian restaurant before Ginsberg's reading. At a table of 20 people, mostly Ginsberg's posse, along with a few of my friends, I was the only woman. But in spite of the Beat's notorious indifference toward my gender, I'd managed to seat myself next to Ginsberg and directly across from Burroughs. Tommy, my 4 year college boyfriend, with whom I'd finally disowned my virginity freshman year, was also seated next to me. A clean cut prep school kid, when we'd first met, he now sported shoulder length hair and a beard, while my own hair hung down to my elbows, crowned by signature Greek fisherman's cap. We sat smoking Lucky Strikes, too shy to speak, completely awed by our dinner guests. Ginsberg, with his wandering eye, was jovial and troll-like as he held court. Burroughs sat regally and silently in his dinner coat, lighting one cigarette after another with a dramatic sweep of his arm each time he struck the match. I'd half expected to meet the two youthful men I'd seen posed with Paul Bowles in a photograph, Tangier 1961, but these men were old, Burroughs in particular. Ginsberg showered Burroughs with doting attention and private jokes that made the rest of us feel like onlookers. They discussed the Lemur Center at Duke, one of the reasons Burroughs had desired to make the trip to Durham. He was a big fan, apparently, of lemurs. When the salads arrived, Ginsberg praised the restaurant's tofu tahini dressing. Thought they were going to say he tossed the salad. I seized my chance to join the conversation. I know. I'll miss this dressing when I'm in San Francisco, I told him. Ah, San Francisco, said Ginsberg, with an ironic little twirl of his salad fork. And what'll you be doing there? I'm going to be an artist. Nodding vaguely, he encouraged me to spend time at the San Francisco Art Institute. It's a wonderful place, he said. I taught a writing workshop there once. After dinner, we all drove to an auditorium on campus where Ginsberg would read. My friends and I sat on the edge of the stage drinking red wine from the bottle, as the beatniks had once done at Ginsberg's quixotic first reading of Howl in North Beach. But the mood wasn't there. The sterile auditorium half empty, Ginsberg read a series of sexually explicit homoerotic poems, and people started filing out. His provocation of the mostly conservative-looking crowd appeared intentional and perfectly in character. He read one lewd poem after another, a determined smile on his face, clearly getting a kick out of the audience's reaction. Toward the end, he read Sunflower Sutra and a string of older work, rewarding those of us who'd stayed. Afterward, we went into a brightly lit reception area with white tablecloths, wine, and platters of cheese. Ginsberg came up to me with his big grin. How did you like the sphincter poems, Francis? I sensed he was making fun of me because I'd been the only woman at dinner surrounded by male sphincters. I thought they were great, Alan, I replied witlessly. That was the power of the icon that was Allen Ginsberg. He'd lost the majority of his audience, and yet I would be the one to obsess over my unclever reply to him for years to come. It didn't matter that most everyone had walked out of the reading, or that I hadn't known how to reply to Allen Ginsberg, or that William Burroughs couldn't have been bothered to say a word to me or anyone else at dinner. They were two of the most legendary figures of the 20th century, and I had spent an evening with them. I had made an important discovery, too. They were only people. We all were, and some of us were also artists, or trying to be artists. Everything was happening on a continuum, I saw, and I allowed myself to believe that night that maybe I would be next, that perhaps a bit of magic dust had floated my way. Off the stiff shoulders of these two old men, I still had the signed copy of Ginsberg's collected poems on my bookshelf in the Haight. It had survived the '89 quake when my bookshelf toppled over, crashing into my dresser, sending my books in every direction. Ginsberg had signed the book, his childish inscription, the only evidence that still remained of my evening with the Beats. San Francisco Camera Work Gallery was located just south of Market Street. Where the fuck? Weren't we talking about her family's alcoholism? What the fuck does this have to do with anything? San Francisco Camera Work Gallery was located just south of Market Street in a former warehouse boasting floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a freight elevator that could carry a crowd, 20 at a time, 2 floors up to the opening reception. I'd spent nearly 24 hours installing my piece, breaking for a short nap on the gallery couch sometime before dawn, and afterward heading to the airport to retrieve my parents. Now my mother stood paralyzed in my installation room, while my father peeked in from the door as if afraid to enter. I picked up a plastic cup of wine and took in the rest of the exhibition, mostly innovative photographs of the artists' interpretations of the show's theme, which was family. On one wall, enormous color murals of family beach scenes offset a black and white triptych of an African American family posed in front of their church. My piece was the only installation work. Good work, Franny, said Anthony Aziz, the gallery board member who had proposed my piece for the show. Powerful stuff. I spent 30 minutes with your piece, longest I've ever spent with a video installation. I'd met Anthony when he was a graduate student in photography at the San Francisco Art Institute. Later, he teamed up with Sammy Kucher, a friend of mine from the New Genres department, to form the collaborative artist team Aziz and Kucher. Glancing across the crowded gallery, I thanked Anthony for including me in the show. I noticed the line forming at the entrance to my room. I think my parents are hogging all the space, I said. God, maybe I should take them out for dinner. Just then, Anthony, always so well groomed and composed, shot an alarmed look in the direction of my room. You're kidding, right? He stared at me. Your parents are here? How are they going to, react? I had the sudden sensation of waking up out of a dream. After so much insight in the editing suite, I'd somehow gone completely numb again in those remaining weeks before the exhibition, focused as I was on the formal and technical aspect of the piece. I'd done an even cleaner edit and hired a technical assistant to help me with the wiring of the piece in the gallery. Alone in the editing room, I'd been overcome with horror at my family's collective dissociation from its own demise, only then to end up feeling nothing at all. I'd forgotten that stark epiphany, bottled it up as I'd always done, creating an emotional debt to be paid later. It's nothing they don't already know, I told Anthony, more evenly than I felt now. They lived it, right? He gave me a concerned look. It's just, your brother's monologues are so honest, Everyone makes statements you'd imagined might be just a little too painful for the others to hear. I guess that's my role in the family, can opener for the can of worms. But I wondered if I'd opened something I shouldn't have. Anthony laughed and put his hand on my shoulder. Anyway, good luck, he said, and keep going. You hear me? I listened to every tape until it repeated, said my mother. I stood right next to the TV screen so I could hear everything. Not me, said my father gruffly. Stick with photography, Francis. That's my advice. My parents were staying at the Stanyan Park Hotel in the Haight, just across from the Golden Gate Park. It was one of the many ways in which they still operated as a couple, traveling together, staying at the same hotel. I took Fell Street from Zuni, where we'd had dinner, up to the Haight. A crowd had gathered in the Panhandle, encircling a string of bongo players as they danced wildly on the discordant rhythms. With all the whirling tie-dye and dreadlocks, the scene had the feel of a Grateful Dead concert. I turned to my mother in the front seat. Did you hear Charlie say he wants to come home for Christmas this year? I heard that, she said tentatively. He looks like the devil, though, doesn't he? He's not taking good care of himself. He's a goddamn drunk, trumpeted my father from the back seat. I like that guy. I turned left on the Stanyan Street. The cherry blossom trees in the park were flowering, the grass underneath them covered in pale pink petals. The drifters and street people had gathered into clusters, some wrapped in old blankets, talking amiably in the last of the April light. The rough red skin of these homeless people reminded me, of course, of Charlie. It's his last stop, I said. Whose? Asked my mother. Lifting off. Let's see. I gotta read it. I don't give a fuck how many pages it is. Gotta get rid of this book. Yeah, it's not very long. About 10, 15 pages. Frisk Bottle, 1995, by Francis Stroh. London, 1995. My friends and I walked up the King's Road in the light September rain, headed for the 606 Club. We'd been drinking martinis at my new flat as a housewarming, the gin still dry on my tongue. I savored the rain pelting us, pelting the pavement. It's down this way, I said, turning onto Lots Road. Smoke-stained brick warehouses ran all the way down to the Thames. A crowd had gathered in front of an unmarked building. Supper Club jazz floated up the stairs from the basement. We got in line. I never knew about this place, said Hari. Charismatic with movie star looks, Hari was studying acting in London for a couple of years. We'd been friends back in San Francisco. It's a hidden gem, said my new friend Nino, paying for the tickets. He wore slick back hair and a boxy suit from the 40s. Members only. We'd met at Camden Market, where Nino sold me a vintage dining table and chairs for my flat. Camilla, Hari's tipsy red-haired girlfriend, slid her arm through his and smiled. It's lovely, she said. I'd been out every night for a solid month since arriving in August, raging on adrenaline ever since I'd been awarded a Fulbright for a year of study in London to complete my Masters of Fine Arts. With the ascension of the young British artist, stars like Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin, London was the epicenter of the art world. Some days I had imposter syndrome, unable to believe my good fortune. Then I reminded myself I was here to begin my life anew, put the past behind, and launch my career as an international artist. This was where I would make my name. Who knew? I might never return to the States. Inside the smoke haze of the 606 Club, we were given a table near the stage. The keyboardist jammed while the female vocalist sang with a voice rather like Billie Holiday's. The guitarist hummed the chords as he played. Nino ordered a round of drinks. Watch the guitarist closely, he said seductively into my ear. It's like he's making love to those strings, right? Nino and I only talked about sex. We'd been to swing dance clubs and martini bars all over London, but we were just friends. After a series of failed relationships in the States with men who'd been remarkably like my father, addicted, adoring, creative, yet essentially self-absorbed, I'd promised myself to stay single and focused on work for a year. Relationships only diffused my focus. Months would pass, my attention fixed on the inevitable ebb and flows of closeness, my ideas rattling around in my head rather than taking concrete shape, my creativity sapped. I was 28, and it all seemed such a chaotic time. Those years I'd spent in San Francisco dating and having relationships, fitting in exhibitions here and there, while trying to figure out how to make a living and still be an artist. Now in London, looking ahead into the glaring light of my bright future, I was finally on the right path, and I wasn't going to let anything get in my way. Hari and Camilla sipped their drinks. They'd met in acting school. Back at my flat on Wadsworth Bridge Road, we'd sat in my conservatory, with the rain hitting the glass roof, pouring one drink after another. In the States, I could hardly drink without feeling ill, but here it seemed I could drink as much as I wanted. It felt as if I'd somehow outrun myself. Hari smiled over at me and tipped his drink back. I felt lucky to have such a good friend in London. We shared an extended network of friends back in San Francisco, the closest thing to family some of us had ever known. Everywhere ever lived, my friends had been my surrogate family, but nowhere more than in San Francisco. Our crowd threw Mexican family dinners every Sunday night, with platters of catfish and black beans and tortillas, a tradition that Hari and I had decided to continue with our London friends. Tomorrow, said Hari, we're going to get you a bike. A bike would help. I didn't own a car, only I was nervous about navigating London's fitful traffic. Riding on the opposite side of the road, I won't have to wear one of those masks for the fumes, will I? Camilla laughed. With that amazing hair, she said. A crime. In celebration of my new expatriate identity, I'd cut off my long blonde hair in favor of a layered 60s bob. Together with the thick black eyeliner, fake lashes, and the high lace up boots I'd adopted, the effect was a throwback to Andy Warhol's silver foil lined factory. Astride my new Raleigh 3 speed, I'd be a cross between Edie Sedgwick and some rave babe bike messenger. He took my hand and led me onto the crowded dance floor. Pulling me in close, his warm hands on my waist, I caught my reflection in the tilted mirror behind the stage, watching that London hipster with the shock of platinum hair groove, and thought for a moment I'd spotted someone else entirely. It felt so liberating, leaving behind my family and the failing business, as if I'd shed a too tight suit and could at last move freely. Walking down a London street, I sometimes imagine myself in the final jailbreak scene of Midnight Express, feeling as if at any moment I might bolt into a run, my sense of buoyancy too much to contain. Bro. As if to test my resolve, my father had begun appearing in public with a young woman named Elisa Keys. He called me in London to tell me that his new girlfriend and I had attended Grosse Pointe High School together. He seemed proud of this. Not recognizing her name, I couldn't recall her face. I responded as I did with all bad family news. First, I felt an intense wave of panic, then shut it out. It was a distant storm. My family's ship might be sinking. My own, though, was just setting sail. One day, my cousin John, who would soon be the new CEO of the family company, called me fraught. Fanny, you have to do something about your father and that woman. Before my father married her, I knew he meant. John, what can I do? While John worried about our family's public image, I ruminated about my father's health. I heard my father was drinking again after 8 years of sobriety. He and Alyssa had met at Sparky's, a preppy bar in Grosse Pointe, where he sat one evening having dinner. Someone told her he was Eric Stroh of Stroh's Beer. She sat down next to him at the bar and asked the bartender, Stroh's, do you serve that crap? I happened to make that beer, my father told her, and they were off to the races. All the years growing up at the mercy of his alcohol-driven mood swings came back to me in flashes of pain, and I partitioned myself off even further from the barrage of bad news. As the weeks passed, I found I had no tolerance for the Alyssa reports from other family members. The frequent calls were becoming a distraction. London was my golden chance to finally get away, to become independent, and I was determined to circumvent the landslide of family drama. What should we do? Whitney asked too often, the transatlantic static engulfing his voice. I heard she quit her job at McDonald's, where she met Dad. Just ignore it, I advised. I'm sure it won't last. My father had told me he would never marry again, and I simply could not picture him with anyone except my mother, certainly not with a high school peer of mine, whoever she was. Even my mother did not take the relationship seriously. I saw them having lunch at the country club. She called me to announce. She paused ceremoniously. I don't think you have to worry, Francis. I saw the girl. Dad is just enjoying himself. By this point, my mother had married Lloyd Marintet, whom she'd known for 40 years. The previous spring, they'd been part of a tour group cruising the Seychelles when Lloyd had grown seriously ill with a respiratory infection. My mother nursed him back to health, sitting in his stateroom through the night and monitoring his breathing. They fell in love. Now my father could no longer drop his laundry off at my mother's house or take her out to dinner. He must have felt abandoned, all their ancient rituals finally settling into history. Soon, my MA program began, and the noise from the States receded into the background. My flat was located just around the corner from my graduate studio at Chelsea College of Arts. I worked every day except Sundays when the studios were closed, and bonded with other graduate students who haunted the studios on Saturdays. In October, I audited a theory class in the undergraduate program located just off the King's Road. I didn't recognize the instructor's name, but my well-read, cynically witty studio mate, Mike, didn't miss a trick. He's a rock star, Francis, Mike said, tossing his head up in approval. Most important critic in London. Students spilled into the hallway when I arrived to class on the first day. I slipped through the crowd and found that all the chains in the seminar room were taken. Some students sat on top of a broad table pushed against the wall, and I seized the last spot, sitting Indian style with my notebook on my lap. Standing before us was a fit man in his early 40s, the famed art critic Trevor Atkins. He had cropped salt and pepper hair, glasses, and an ordinary face made exceptional only by the rather pained expression he wore, as if his very popularity were a source of embarrassment to him. Embarrassing. His hands tested tentatively on the back of a chair as the masses settled themselves. When he finally spoke, I was transfixed. He had a gift for the oblique, the ungraspable, managing to synthesize everything I had ever read or thought about art over the years, while somehow creating his own art form with the parallels he so astutely drew between art and theory. The seminar left me feeling only more motivated. I wanted to participate meaningfully in the dialogue between art and theory. I wanted, too, to know this Trevor Atkins, to absorb his influence, and sought out conversations with him whenever possible, even arranging studio visits with him for all the MAs. Then Trevor and I arranged the theory seminar for the MA program, inviting all the top theorists in London. Suddenly I had access to people I'd only read about in the States. These luminaries came out to the pub with us after class and later to my dinner parties. I had finally landed exactly where I needed to be, it seemed. The change of longitude acted as a kickstarter for my art. I worked feverishly day and night to keep up with the immense flow of ideas, making small installations in my studio as sketches for the larger pieces. I spent hours each day slicing up Dennis Cooper's Frisk line by line, just as Cooper's protagonists sliced up his victims' bodies. I relabeled beer bottles with the dismembered texts and sold them as art objects at a pub on the King's Road. Only much later did the pieces' seemingly disparate links between the devaluation of the artist, human carnage, and my family's brewing history become clear to me. I hardly slept. I'd wake in the middle of the night and scribble ideas inside a journal. Everything I'd ever thought or read was taking on visual shape, and I had to catch it all as if I could outrun my terror of something essential slipping away. Come morning, I discard almost everything or morph certain aspects of ideas into new ones that might bear fruit. One sleepless night, the sky cracked with thunder and rain pelted against my bedroom windows. I dropped my journal onto the floor and walked through my conservatory out onto the tiny terrace. The rain coming down hard on my head. I raised my arms up toward the pink glowing dome of London's sky. I caught the rain in my hands, shallow pools forming in my palms, and splashed it over my face and neck like holy water. I stood there a long time, feeling the warm rain soak straight through my t-shirt to my skin. The muffled sound of traffic horns traveled over the buildings to merge with the rumble of thunder splitting open the clouds. I could stand there as long as I wanted, I realized. My life felt utterly my own. Trevor Atkins and I had been in a darkened seminar room for hours. I projected slide after slide of my work from 1990 to 1995 while he hit me with searching questions. Certain slides we'd linger on for 15 minutes or more, discussing my ideas, my intentions. A bold rectangle of light hit the wall when the last slide had finished. I find it refreshing, Trevor said, that your work is not exactly female. I wasn't sure how to take this. My breath quickened, erratic, imprecise. I hadn't been able to sleep the night before, and in anticipation of our meeting, I'd stayed up reading Trevor's exhibition catalog essays. Compared to his brilliant lectures, his writing style seemed stiff, and yet attaining his respect felt critical. Trevor shifted in this chair. Then again, certain pieces are clearly about how you perceive others in relation to yourself, right? There is a self consciousness to them, really, and this, I suppose, could be seen as female. He was referring to my family piece. I knew, among others, my work does tend to deal with the relativity of perception, I offered, and with point of view. I hated the idea of my work being identified as female. I wanted Trevor to see me only as brilliant, apart from my sex. I yearned for this with every synapse in my brain and every cell in my body, as if my self realization as an artist were entirely dependent on his favorable opinion of my work. I lifted the slide tray from the projector, and Trevor reluctantly picked up his canvas book bag. He had been in that room with me for 2.5 hours, 3 times the allotment for a studio visit, which is what this was, technically. Much of our relationship took place in situations like these: darkened rooms with projected slides, empty theaters after assemblies or lectures had finished, hallways or corners of graduate studios where no one walked or worked nearby. We would always linger on a bit, talking about Derrida, how do you say his name? Derrida? Or Warhol, or my newest installation, maybe. Trevor's book in progress, but the distance he kept whenever others were around became confusing to me. Only when I discovered he was married did I understand. Accepting the inherent distance, I resolved to channel my interest in this man into my work itself, spending longer hours yet in the studio. You didn't even know this motherfucker was married? One fog draped night, I attended the Fulbright Coalition's Christmas party, a semi formal affair in Baroque quarters off Bond Street. With its arched rooftop spires and 2-story windows, the house resembled a Gothic cathedral. Inside, a butler took my coat and gestured toward a cavernous living room where, hovering above the crowd, the branches of a towering evergreen were decorated with tiny white lights and festive ornaments. Servants carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres and glasses of red wine. I glimpsed only a few of my fellow Fulbrighters. In my patent leather boots and faux fur coat, I clearly stood out in this room full of strangers, very conservatively dressed, very British, as the artist. The majority of the Fulbright scholars, all of us having come to London to pursue a year of graduate study in the humanities, had attended Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. The standard scholarship funded 9 months of coursework and living expenses, but my MA program at Chelsea ran a full 12 months. To cover the difference, I had applied for a 3-month extension on my grant and was still waiting to hear if the supplement had been rewarded. Across the room, I spotted James Rutherford, director of the Fulbright Coalition, striking with his dark, tailored suit and perfectly combed hair. Rutherford deftly maneuvered through the crowd, chatting up distinguished-looking guests, making swift introductions along the way. The Fulbright program was just expanding its focus from the humanities into the realm of international business, and James was overseeing this transition. At our last Fulbright meeting, he had urged the scholars to make a point of getting to know the business crowd who would be present tonight. "Good evening, Francis," bellowed James as I moved to intercept him. "How's the art coming?" I told him I was having a very productive year and thanked him. "This is Bruce Lakefield," said James, introducing a bored-looking man who just materialized to his right, with a deference that meant Bruce must be a major donor, or a potential one. "Bruce, this is our artist, Francis Stroh." I'd been told during the orientation in September that artists were only very rarely granted Fulbrights, and searched James's face for any sign that my additional grant might be in jeopardy. But he had already turned toward another group. "How do you do?" asked Bruce in a clipped American accent as he offered me his hand, his expression unmoved. He had removed his sport coat and wore a white collared shirt with a silky sheened necktie. "You're an American," I said, for lack of anything else to say. Bruce had lived in London less than a year, he told me. He asked me how I was enjoying living there. This would be my first Christmas not spent in Michigan, and I suddenly felt very grown up. "Wonderful," I said. "The Fulbright program has made the experience of living abroad, very comfortable. They treat us like royalty." I didn't tell him that when I returned from this swank Fulbright gathering, it would be to an unheated art studio at Chelsea College, where I did my work in a down coat, ski hat, and gloves. Bruce asked me question after question about the program, and I talked it up as if my life depended on it, hoping he might tell James just how enthusiastic I'd been, how I had convinced him of the Fulbright program's inherent value. Finally, after listening intently to my gushing, he reached into his pocket and produced a white business card. "Francis, I'd like you to come work for me," he said with conviction, handing me the card. "You have a real talent for sales. I could use someone like you on my team." I took the card. "Bruce Lakefield, CEO, Lehman Brothers International," it read. Although flattered, I laughed. Did he think I'd just ditch everything for an investment banking job? Hell, I'd been approached by 2 of the best galleries in London, Lassane Gallery and Interim Art. It wasn't like I needed the job. What I needed was the last installment of grant money. I shook my head. "Apologies, Mr. Lakefield, but I'm an artist." He looked at me with astonishment, and then he reached out to shake my hand. "Well, you'll let me know if you change your mind." Alicia Keys. Alisa Keys. Alright, that's all. How many more fucking pages do I have to go in this book? What's this? 191 to... I'm not obviously reading that part. 191 to 314, so 123 pages. 123 motherfucking pages to go. Alright, we can do this. It's not been a bad read. It's not been a good one either. Let's see how much we've progressed. We have that much to go. You can see there's a remainder mark, which means the book didn't sell for shit. But that's that. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.